Snow White and Rose Red. Once upon a time there was a poor widow who lived with her two little girls in a cottage by the edge of the forest. In front of the cottage was a small garden in which grew two rose bushes. One bush bore white roses and the other red roses. These rose bushes were older than the little girls, who were named after them. The two children were alike in that they were both good and obedient, and always busy and happy. They were quite different in their appearances and in their ways. One sister was fair-haired, and she was rather quiet and gentle. In the summer she liked to wear in her hair a rose from the rose bush. She was called Snow White. The other sister was dark-haired. She loved to run about and skip and dance. She was lively and gay. She liked to wear in her hair a rose from the red rose bush. Her name was Rose Red. Snow White and Rose Red were devoted to each other and often vowed that they would stay together as long as they lived. And whenever they went out, they always walked along hand in hand. The children spent a good deal of their time playing in the forest. None of the wild animals there ever harmed them, and they often came close to the little girls, who seemed to trust them. The wild hares used to eat from their hands, the deer grazed beside them, and the stags leaped about them. The birds sat on the branches nearby and sang their sweetest songs. If the children found themselves far from home at night, as they came on, they would even spend the night in the forest. They used to lie down together on a bed of moss and sleep until morning. No harm ever came to them. Their mother knew that she needed to have no fear for her children when they were in the forest. Once, when Snow White and Rose Red had spent the night in the forest, they wakened in the morning to find a beautiful child in a shining white dress sitting beside them. The child smiled at them and then vanished. When the girls had looked around, they found out they had been sleeping all night close to the edge of a steep cliff. They would have certainly fallen over the edge if they had moved at all. When they told their mother about this, she said the child they had seen must have been the guardian angel who watches over good children. Snow White and Rose Red kept their mother's cottages so clean and tidy that it was a pleasure to go into. Every morning in the summer, Rose Red gathered a bunch of fresh flowers and arranged them in a vase beside her mother's bed. Along the flowers there was always one white rose and one red rose from the bushes in their garden. Every morning in the winter, Snow White lit the fire and hung the kettle over it. The kettle was made of copper, and Snow White kept it polished so it shone like gold. In the winter evenings, when the snow was falling, the mother and her little girls gathered round the fire. While the two girls sat spinning, their mother read aloud to them from a large book. Beside them on the floor slept a white lamb, and a white dove perched nearby. Suddenly, one evening, as they were sitting quietly by the fire, a loud knock was heard upon the door. "Open the door quickly, Rose Red," said her mother. "Some poor traveler must have lost his way." Rose Red ran and pulled back the bolt and then flung open the door. Into the room there walked not a weary traveler, but a big black bear. Rose Red ran screaming towards her mother. Snow White hid behind her mother's chair. The lamp began to bleat, and the dove woke up fluttering. "I have not come to hurt you," said the bear in a gentle voice. "I only want to warm myself by your fire, for I am half frozen." "Poor bear," said the mother. "Come in and lay down by the fire, and take care that you do not burn your furry coat." Then she called to her children, "Snow White, Rose Red, you don't need to hide. The bear will do you no harm." So the children came timidly towards the fire, and the lamb and the dove drew nearer. "Dear children, will you sweep the snow off my fur?" asked the bear. Then Snow White and Rose Red took it in turn to sweep the snow from the bear's coat. By the time they had finished, they had lost all their fear, and the bear had become their playmate. When bedtime came, the mother said, "Stay here by the fire all night, gentle bear." In the morning, the little girls opened the door, and the bear trotted away through the snow into the woods. In the evening the bear returned, and when the door was open, he walked to the hearth and lay down, as if he had done this all his life. The next evening he came again, and every evening afterwards, for the whole winter. The children grew so fond of him that at night the door was never fastened until their big black friend had arrived. Then they used to play together in front of the fire. The children would pull the bear's hair and put their feet upon his back and roll him over. When he growled at them in fun, they laughed and rolled over with him. The bear's nightly visits continued until spring, when the forest became green again and the bear began to sing. "Goodbye, dear children. Now that spring is here, I must leave you, and I shall not return all summer." "Why must you leave us, dear bear, and where would you go?" asked Snow White. "I must stay in the forest to guard my treasures from wicked dwarfs," replied the bear. "In winter the ground is frozen hard, but now that the sun has melted the ice, the ground will become soft and the dwarfs will begin to dig again." Snow White and Rose Red sadly unbolted the door for their dear friend. As the bear passed through the doorway, a piece of his fur caught in the latch. Snow White and Rose Red saw a gleaming gold beneath the fur, but she could not be certain about this. The little girls stood in the doorway waving to their friend, thinking about how much they would miss him in the evenings. The bear trotted quickly away and was soon hidden by the trees. Some time afterwards the mother sent her children into the forest to gather firewood. They came across a large tree lying on the ground. Soon something was jumping backwards and forwards over the trunk of the tree, and at first they could not tell what it was. As they came nearer, they saw it was a tiny dwarf with an old withered face and a white beard. He had tried to split the tree trunk with his little axe, and his beard had become trapped in the crack he made. He hopped over the trunk again and again and tugged furiously at the beard, but he could not pull it free. "Let me see what I can do," said Snow White. She took her scissors from her pocket and cut the dwarf's beard close to the tree trunk so that way he was freed. As soon as the dwarf found himself free, he picked up a bag of gold which was lying beside the tree and turned towards the girls. Not a word of thanks did he utter. Instead, all he could mumble was, "You wicked children! How dare you cut off a piece of my beautiful beard? Bad luck on you!" Another day, some time later, Snow White and Rose Red went fishing by the banks of a stream. In the distance they saw a queer little figure hopping up and down as if it were about to jump in the stream. They ran forward and found that dwarf again. "What are you trying to do?" asked Rose Red. "Surely you don't want to jump into the water." "I'm not such a fool," screamed the dwarf. "Can't you see this huge fish is dragging me into the stream?" When the sisters looked more closely, they could see the little dwarf had hooked a large fish on the end of his fishing line. Unfortunately, at the same time, his beard had become entangled with the line. Every time the fish tried to jerk itself from the hook, the dwarf was dragged nearer and nearer to the water's edge. He was clutching at the reeds and the grasses on the bank of the stream. He was being pulled nearer and nearer to the water. The children quickly grasped the dwarf and hung on to him with all their strength. But try it they might, they could not disentangle his beard from the fishing line. At last, Rose Red took out her scissors and cut off more than half his beard. Although the dwarf knew that she had done this to save his life, he flew into a terrible rage. "How dare you disfigure me this way?" he screamed. "First you cut off the end of my beard, now you cut half of it off. How can I let people see me when I look such a fright? I hope you run until you have no soles left on your shoes." Then he picked up a bag of pearls which he had hidden among the rushes, swung it over his shoulders, and disappeared. Some time afterwards, Snow White and Rose Red were sent to town by their mother to buy needles and thread. The road led them across a bare stretch of land strewn with boulders and rocks. There they noticed a large bird hovering over a certain spot. Suddenly, the bird pounced down on the children, and they heard pitiful cries. They rushed forward and saw with horror that the huge eagle had the dwarf in his talons and was about to carry him off. Snow White and Rose Red caught onto the little man's coattails and hung on with all their might. They pulled so hard that at last the eagle dropped the dwarf and flew away. As soon as the dwarf had recovered from fright, he turned to his sisters. "You clumsy clots," he raged. What do you mean to handle me so roughly? You could have nearly torn my new coat off my back. Could you have handled me more carefully?" Then he picked up a sack of precious stones and disappeared behind one of the boulders. Snow White and Rose Red were not by now used to his rudeness and did not expect thanks for their help. They went on to town where they bought the needles and thread for their mother. On their way home in the evening, they came across the dwarf once more in the same place. He was kneeling on the ground, gazing at all the jewels which were spread around him. The jewels sparkled and gleamed with such fire that the children thought they had never seen anything so beautiful. They could not help but stop and stare. Suddenly, the dwarf looked up. "What are you gaping at?" he yelled, as his face grew bright red with anger. At that moment, a terrible growl was heard, and a big black bear came shuffling out of the forest towards them. The dwarf sprang to his feet, terrified. His angry red face became white with fear. Before the dwarf had time to escape, the bear was beside him. Then the dwarf, in a shaky voice, pleaded, "Dear Mr. Bear, please spare my life, I beg of you. I am so small, I would only be a mouthful for you to eat. If you're hungry, why don't you eat these two wicked girls? They are much plumper than I am, and if you spare me, I'll give you all the treasure." But the bear paid no attention to the words of the dwarf. He lifted his forepaw with a single blow, and the dwarf lay dead on the ground. The little girls were running off in fright when the bear called after them, "Snow White, Rose Red, don't be afraid, don't you know me?" The children recognized with delight the voice of their dear friend. They turned and they ran towards him, and they came trotting to meet them. As they met, his fur fell from him, and instead of a shaggy bear, there stood beside him a handsome young man dressed in a cloth of gold. "I am a king's son," he said. "That wicked dwarf robbed me of all my treasures and put a spell on me, so that way I was changed into a bear. Ever since then I have been wandering through the forest, watching for a chance to kill him. Not until he was dead could the spell be lifted from me. Now I am free, and he has received his punishment." Snow White and Rose Red were overjoyed when they heard this tale, as was their mother when the prince came home with them. A few years afterwards, Snow White married the prince, and Rose Red married his brother. The two princes shared their treasure, which the dwarf hidden for so long. They all lived happily together in a large castle. The mother of Snow White and Rose Red went to live with them. In the castle garden, below her window, were planted the two rose bushes from her cottage garden. Every summer they bore them just the most beautiful white and red roses, just as they had done before. The end.